Okay, welcome and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Jane Irrigation Training Series. I'm Richard Restuccia, Vice President of Water Management Solutions, and today we're talking about something that is critically important to your system, and that is pre-season filter preparation. And with some diligence in maintenance, and it doesn't take much. It really is the pay me now or pay me later scenario. And in this case, what you're paying with is a little bit of your time. You can alleviate some real headaches down the road during the critical times of the season. So really important subject today, and taking us through this subject is Cory Broad, who, as you know, if you've seen his presentations before, you know they're full of really good practical knowledge. Cory's got a quite extensive background in irrigation, but the thing I really appreciate about Cory is he's also a certified crop advisor. He was the agriculturist of the year last year in Madera County. He really cares about his community. He cares about irrigation and water management and sustainability. He cares about doing things right. And probably most important, he cares about his customers and his customer success. And so certainly if I was going to start growing in the Central Valley next week, Cory would be my first call. So Cory, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I've been talking to you the past few weeks, and you've been out among them in the fields the past few weeks. Things are starting to heat up. What's it like out there?
Yeah, certainly. And appreciate the kind words and the introduction there, and welcome everybody. And as far as kind of what the pace is like around here, it's certainly ramped up. I know in kind of some of the casual chat before we got started, we were talking about the weather in general, and we're going to see a potential of 85 by the end of next week. And it's certainly, like I said, picked up the pace. Things are moving in the field. Almonds are completely leafed out, and there's actually some nuts that are on the tree now and set, and pistachios will be coming out here really shortly with this warm weather, and the vines are pushing as well. So there's a lot of activity going on for sure.
Wow, that's great to hear, Cory. It's always an exciting time of year when everything kicks off, and certainly you've had pretty good weather, right?
Yeah, I mean, we wish that we had a little bit more, I think, water stored for kind of this future irrigation. It's going to be a challenging water year, but the beautiful thing about the Central Valley is we have pretty, for all things considered, pretty mellow winters. And yeah, it can be pretty hot during the summer, but with the cool nights and warm days, it certainly allows those plants to grow and produce and make some pretty bountiful yields to help feed the world.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, listen, one of the things everybody should be doing is pre-season filter preparation, right? And maybe it should have already been done, or maybe there's still time to do it. I don't know. We're going to find out today, though. But we're excited to learn about that. And just want to remind everybody, I've got the chat and the Q&A both open. So as you have questions for Cory, filter them in here and type them in, and I'll do my best to get them all in there. So anyway, Cory, thanks again.
Yep, thank you guys. And yeah, there definitely is time. We could have had a little bit more time to get it done, but if there's something on here that you go, man, I haven't gotten to that's okay. You can get on it. There's still time. And also, if you're in the service area, I'm certainly available. But jumping into it, looking at the topic, I think it's important to look at the overview and kind of where Jane fits into the model. So Jane Irrigation is obviously a world leader in micro irrigation. And one of the solutions that we offer is going to be obviously filtration for all the products that we sell. And so it's really important to make sure you get the right fit. Filtration system is really one of the most important pieces, if not the most important piece to your irrigation system investment. And I use the word investment because you've spent a lot of money, especially in agriculture, to try and be more sustainable and then also grow a better and more profitable crop at the end of the day. And this is the piece of equipment that's going to protect all the rest of your infrastructure that you've paid a lot of money to put in to do that. And so I think you have to look at make sure that the filtration system's correct for your irrigation system and the application you're using it in. But also you need to consider your operation. What's my labor situation like? What are my constraints on water? What's my water quality? What am I going to do with my wastewater? There's a lot of things that need to fit around the operation, not just, oh, this is a certain mesh and it'll protect this emission device. I think there's a lot of conversation that will supersede just that base level kind of introductory that I find a lot of growers don't actually get that consulting on. And then, of course, I know it's very simple and rudimentary, but what's the number one cause of drip irrigation failure in the world? It's plugging. Look at the picture on the left-hand side. You can see it. I'm not saying that having the best filtration system will stop all plugging. I think it certainly will make it manageable. It'll do a really fine job if you're taking care of your filter and your system. But again, the example on the left-hand side is, exactly what we don't want to see with that investment that we put into our field. And again, that's an emission device, a PC dripper. You can see here where there's actually impaction of material inside the flow path area, and obviously that's going to degrade, your uniformity and your system performance. So that's why we're talking about it. So if you look at sand media systems, I think it's important to note that what you did at the end of last season is really going to impact where you start this season. If you didn't do anything at the end of the season, you left it right where it was, it may be exactly that way. It may actually be worse depending on what your conditions are. And of course, if you properly maintain that system during the course of the season last year and after the last irrigation event, you cleaned the system out, which can come in a number of different ways. We'll talk about some of those. You're probably ahead of the curve of most growers in my experience. And so what I always say is the first step to the new season always needs to be opening up each tank and inspecting your media. And you talk about me being out in the field, Richard. These pictures were actually taken last week.
Yeah.
On a site that I was on. I had a grower who had some questions and had some issues. And again, you don't have to know anything about this, and you can open up the two lids of the tanks and look inside, and you notice there's a stark difference immediately. And that should trigger you to say, okay, what's causing this, or what is it? What issue could that be creating?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was going to ask, Cory. If I look at this, is this just because one got filled up with more sand a year ago, or what's happening here?
Yeah, I think there's a few scenarios that can cause the situation that you have. One of the most important ones, of course, is the throttling valve on the backwash line for the sand media tank. It's usually a 3-inch brass gate valve. Jane actually makes a plastic version of this valve, which is really nice because it's less susceptible to theft, where people are actually, if their filter station's in a remote area, they're actually taking the brass items. And so that is something that we can do, but setting that valve correctly to make sure that you're not having too much flow going out of your backwash and then taking some of the sand media with it. In this particular case, the top picture is actually the first tank in the system that gets flushed every flush cycle. And so what happens is it's actually not being flushed as hard as the other tanks because the other tanks are still dirty. And so once this tank gets cleaned out, it performs better and provides more pressure. So the bottom picture, the tanks before that are actually flushed. So it's actually providing more force, and it's actually evacuating the sand out of the sand media tank, along with the debris, which is great, but they didn't check their media levels throughout the year. And like I said, luckily this wasn't catastrophic, but it's certainly, a stark difference.
Yeah, certainly. And so that would, if this wasn't checked and it was left unchecked, I just wouldn't filter as much material out, right? Is that right?
Technically would filter less material, and then over time, that number is going to continue to shrink on what its effective filtering capacity would be. And maybe one day there isn't anything left in there over time. And so again, it's just something simple. It's 4 bolts. If you have an impact driver, 15 minutes, you can look inside those tanks depending on the size of your system, and again, have a really good idea of what's going on. But to take it a step further, so to turn 15 minutes into 20 minutes, I always say pull some of that media out. You could actually see in that last picture before where I had dug a little bit with my hand. You can also use a small yard hand spade. Just be really careful that you don't damage the inside of the tank. But what we'll do is we will pull that sand media sample out, and we want to feel the grit level. With use, that media will wear and become less abrasive, thus less effective. Think about beach sand. We can walk on it, and other than it maybe being a little warm, it's actually really soft. That's from years and years and years of conditioning. This is actually a crushed silica, so it's actually kind of jagged and sharp, and so it's abrasive. So what you want to do is take some new sand media out of a bag and kind of get that as a baseline if you're not used to the feel. and then feel, as you can see in my hand there, kind of what the condition of that is. If it becomes more rounded, obviously it's probably time to replace it. As a manufacturer, I would love it if you would replace it every year. I don't think that's common practice. I would say that, you know, most growers are probably pushing that can down the road a little bit to as much as 5 years. Again, check it, stay on top of it, and like anything else, just use proper maintenance on it. If you check that media bed, there's no excessive debris in there, which is the non-media sand coming out of your well or water source, sticks, stones, algae, aquatic life. I found fish inside of these before. You'd be amazed, but obviously you want to make sure to not have any of those major debris in there. If you're good to go from that standpoint, now it's time to just inspect the inside of those tanks, look for any visible damage. If there's obviously something there, you're certainly going to want to replace it. But again, just feel that sand, understand the media condition, check the levels, and just make sure you're ready to be operational.
Hey, Cory, I just have a quick question. Is there anything special about this sand that would make it cost a lot of money, or is it just sand that's relatively inexpensive?
It's pretty specialized in the sense that it comes in a bag with a specific weight, but also the size of the particles is what defines the mesh filtering capacity of your filter. So there's, you know, commonly number 12, number 16, and number 20 grit. And so those different grits have different filtering capacities at the end of the day. So one may be good for drip tape and the other one may be good for sprinklers. And if you get those numbers right, you can actually end up plugging, you know, maybe the drip tape if you didn't use the right size mesh. So yeah, it is really important to understand and make sure you're getting the right one for what product you're using.
Okay, great. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Of course. So now that we've gone through, we've opened the lids, we've checked the media, and we're going to say that all that is good. What I like to do is go through and do a manual flush of the system. And so prior to starting that irrigation system, we're going to, again, manually flush it. But one of the things we need to do is check the other filter on our sand media system. And this one that gets neglected quite a bit. It's usually a 3/4 or 1-inch filter. It's a simple screen filter. Many of them out there are actually a Jane irrigation product. We supply to a lot of different companies for that. So basically you just unscrew the basin of the filter. If there's debris present, rinse that screen and rinse that basin out with clean water and then reinstall. Here's a picture of a filter a week ago that needed a little bit of TLC as you can see there. So pretty straightforward, another 2-3 minute process depending on how far you are from maybe fresh water or a hose bib.
So Cory,
yep.
So that picture on number 7 there, so I really just clean it out before the beginning of the season and then I'm good to go for the rest of the year?
I think it's one of those things, as often as you're willing to check it, I would appreciate it. Again, it's usually a very simple process, right? It's a minute to maybe unscrew that, look at it, rinse it out, and make sure you're good to go. You can actually do that with the system running. There's usually a little shutoff valve ahead of it. So you can turn it off and maybe go to the discharge end of your filters and use a ball valve connection down there or a hose and just spray it off and just keep it clean. Remember that that's being exposed to your unfiltered water, and it's what's protecting your automatic control valves and solenoids on your sand media system. So it is really important that this filter works and protects those units, because if they clog, maybe your filters won't flush.
Yeah, that's really good to know. Thank you.
Of course. So again, we all know that there's a key benefit to sand media, which is going to be the automatic flushing capacity when it's being used with the controller. But again, go through and do a manual flush. So what we want to do is we want to get those tanks clean. And I use that loosely because depending on how well we do it and what we've actually done will kind of change what amount clean that actually is. But what we're going to do is we're going to start by turning on the irrigation system with the back flush controller in the off position. And that's because I want to manually control each tank. So if you go to the first tank, you can call tank number 1 whatever you want in your lineup. There's no specificity there. And then you can see the picture I have over here. There's the solenoid that connects to the backwash valve, and there's a little kind of arrow there. And you just put a flathead screwdriver in that unit and you turn it into the up position. You can see I kind of drew a yellow arrow for reference. You just turn that up a 1/4 turn. That tank should start flushing. If it doesn't, that means that you have issues in that control line that feeds that solenoid. And that's because you probably didn't clean that little 3/4 inch filter well enough. But again, 95% of the time you turn that thing and that tank will start flushing, and that tank will flush until you turn that back into the off position. So again, it really allows us to control and get excessive duration and make sure we're getting all the right things we need to do. So
Cory, is that screw going to be pretty easy to turn? Should I anticipate it turning easily? Do they stick? Do you ever have a problem with that?
yeah, they definitely can, especially over time. I know it's a piece of stainless, but it actually rust can build up in there. I would say that always have at least a knife or a screwdriver present. I've turned a few by hand before. I would say that most of them I still end up just using maybe a pocket knife because I usually have one, and it's very easy to do. It doesn't take much torque. If you have to torque it, you probably should replace it. That tells me there's something else going on.
Okay, that's great. That's a good expectation to have.
Of course. And so kind of going back, so we've initiated that tank to start flushing with that quarter turn, and now it's going to do that until we tell it to stop. What's really important is making sure that we get the pressure on the bottom side of the tanks, which usually there's a pressure gauge on the bottom log or manifold, as we call it. And we want to make sure we get at least 25 pounds. That's kind of the industry expectation. And so to achieve that, on most sand media systems, there should be a butterfly valve downstream of the filtration system, usually present before it goes down into the ground for the PVC connection. What we want to do is if we have to, we can turn that valve towards the closed position and artificially build some pressure on the bottom of the tanks during backflush to make sure we achieve that 25 PSI minimum and make sure that we're really flushing those tanks for a good duration, but also with good force. Again, be mindful of incoming pressure, because as you decrease that valve, you're decreasing the flow, which will increase the pressure. And if the tanks are really, really dirty, you're going to have potential pressure buildup on the upstream side. So watch the other gauge. Don't just look at the bottom one. You can see here on the left-hand side, this wasn't during a backflush, but this was in a field I was in a couple of years ago, and they were at almost 120 PSI on the top side of this filtration system, which you can imagine standing next to that is a little bit eerie. But nonetheless, that was obviously some excessive plugging inside the filtration system. And again, I don't ever want to see it get that high. Please avoid that. And so nonetheless, just be really cognizant of that. So if you've achieved that bottom pressure, 25 PSI, usually a good 2 to 3 minute cycle of flushing on that tank continuously is really going to help you. Make sure you've cleaned it out. Then what you can do is, again, turn that solenoid back to the off position, go to the next tank and initiate that tank. And just, again, if you have 2 tanks, then you just do it, twice. If you have 3 times. If you have 18, it's 18 times. It's a little more cumbersome. But nonetheless, go through, manually control each one of those, make sure that you're controlling how hard and how good it's flushing, and get them as clean as possible. Once you've gone through and completed that on every tank, you got to open the downstream valve again. That goes back out into the field that we closed to build that artificial pressure. And what we want to do is we want to check the pressure differential between the upstream and the downstream side of the filtration system. If it's excessive, then you definitely want to go through and manually flush again, because maybe there's still some particulate in there that we haven't gotten out. Again, depending on how your sand media system is sized, which is basically the number of tanks versus the flow that's incoming to be filtered, the PSI differential will be affected by that. In this case, you can see 2 gauges on the left-hand side, just under 40 on the top and maybe 36, 37 on the bottom. So let's say 39 to 37, 2 PSI differential. That's very good. I think it's very normal. To find 0 is really uncommon. Once we start getting over 5, that's when you're wasting energy to make sure that you're getting water through those tanks, and tells you that there may be something else wrong.
Yeah. So Cory, what should I do if I've got a bigger than 5 PSI differential? What are some steps I can take?
Yeah, so I think the number one thing, again, is look at the flow meter to the system, understand how much water is going through that filtration system. And so most of these sand media tanks on like a 48-inch sand media setup, each tank can handle roughly 250 to 300 gallons a minute filtering capacity. And so if you look at it and you say, well, I have 1,000 gallons a minute going through my system and I have 4 tanks. Well, that tells you, from a standard flow procedure, that's probably pretty acceptable. So if you're seeing what I would define as, again, above 5, kind of an excessive loss, it's probably time to change that media because there are issues deep in the bed that you haven't seen or been able to flush out. And actually, there could be plugging of your under drain system, which is the slotted area that allows water to pass out and go into the system. And if you get particulates plugged in there, it's obviously extremely restrictive. And so at that point, you have to evacuate the media inside the sand media tanks and then go through and actually manually clean those backwash units.
Yeah, those are some great steps and tips to take, Cory. Thanks.
For sure. So now with the irrigation system running, we're going to go and we're going to turn on the backflush controller. And so with a correct PSI differential, which is the difference between the incoming and the downstream end of the filters, the controller should not go into automatic backflush. And so with that happening, we're going to open the face of the controller. You can see I circled a screw on the right side of the screen of the picture there in yellow. Again, can be done with a pocket knife. A screwdriver is a little bit easier on this one, but go ahead and back that screw out. Most of these controllers are on a hinge, so that face of the controller actually pulls towards you. So just be careful not to pull any wires. Maybe look for spiders and bugs, but just get an idea of what's going on in there. Make sure there's no moisture buildup. Make sure that any of the gauges in there are cracked. There's no corrosion on the wires. Make sure they all look like they're connected. Just a simple spot check. Don't have to be any electrical expert, but just kind of make sure everything looks okay and looks clean. If there's any issues there or any concerns, make sure you contact your dealer, and then also, if possible, correct them yourself before continuing to operate the system. So just a simple spot check of what's going on in the controller. Now what we want to do is we want to test the automatic function. Again, I talked about that's the value added of these sand media filtration systems. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit the manual start button one time, which I circled in green on the picture on the left-hand side. That's going to initiate a flush cycle for the entire system. So tank 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. You should hear the first solenoid click and tank 1 should start flushing. So just like you turned that screw earlier to make the solenoid turn, instead, the electrical pulse from the controller has told it to do so. And then what you want to do is you want to allow the automatic flush cycle to complete on each tank. So make sure you stand by and make sure that each tank actually flushes and each solenoid is clicking, because if one of them is down or there's a damaged wire or short or something in the system, that tank may or may not continue to flush throughout the season, and we want to correct that early on. So just make sure that it goes through the cycle automatically. After that, I reset the backflush counter to 0. This is going to allow us to track how often that system is flushing and is really super helpful for dialing it in long term. Which leads me into the next point. So the periodic flush. As you can see here, this is actually a picture from one of my friend's ranches, and he's a great farmer, but he had this set up maybe not the way that I would have wanted it set it up. So what you look at is you look at this periodic flush, which means that in this case, he has it set to 12. Every 12 hours, no matter what the pressure differential is on the tanks, it will flush. And so that may or may not be acceptable depending on the sediment load and debris that's coming in. What I like to do early in the season is set the periodic flush to 2 to 4 hours and run a 12-hour set, and then work backwards to achieve the appropriate amount of times that it should flush before the pressure differential builds up. And I think that we often rely too much on the differential switch in the controller to initiate that cycle. Basically, we allow it to build up to 7 to 10 pounds of PSI degradation between the incoming and the outlet of the filtration system, and then go, oh, it's time to flush. It's no different than getting really, really ill and then going, oh, I should take some antibiotics and get some rest, versus, Richard, I'm not feeling great today, and I'm going to, take it easy this afternoon and maybe get a couple extra hours of sleep. It's kind of the same concept. I would rather flush before we get to this excessive buildup and then, try and force the system to clean itself. It's better to get ahead of that curve, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a great explanation of it. I like that.
So, and again, this was the issue that he was getting in his filters, is on the left-hand side is actually your media. The right-hand side was, what they would, most people would call well sand. It may not technically be sand by classification, but it's certainly sediment that's coming from the well. And that fine material is building up on those layers of media beds and getting in between the actual crushed silica and essentially kind of sealing off the tanks, creating excessive pressure degradation, causing the system to flush. But until it hits that point, these pieces of material are being forced into the media bed harder and harder by the incoming water until the flush cycle is initiated. So at first it's only on the top, but over time it's being pushed deeper and deeper into that media bed, which can be up to 16 inches deep. So it's really important to get ahead of that. Backwash time is, I think, pretty universally accepted. I talked about earlier flushing them 2 to 3 minutes by yourself on a manual flush. I think depending on what type of debris and how often it's being removed, I found that most people have it set to about 1:30. And in this case, he had it set to 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And that's to make sure that we got any of the material that had been embedded deep into the sand media bed. It was actually had enough time to lift it out. And so that's why you would want a longer duration. Again, most systems should start at about 1:30, and then again, kind of work backwards over time. Our goal is to maximize that water use efficiency. So excessive backwashing and especially duration is something we want to avoid because we don't want to waste that water for sure.
Yeah, that's one thing I was interested in, Cory, is how much water is used in this backwash time, and where does it go, and is this an efficient use of water?
Of course. Now, and I figured with water use efficiency, I might catch your attention. It's certainly something that we need to consider. On average, the discourse in the industry and most requirements is 200 gallons per minute per tank outflow on the backwash. So I've seen some systems that run 220. We've ran some systems down to 180, but we can just say 200 for easy math. So you figure in 1:30, you're talking about 300 gallons of water going out. And so where do you put that? If you have a reservoir, there are people that have reservoir recycling systems. There's other filtration units that have been kind of repurposed for recycling that backwash water and just trying to get the sediment out and dump it on the ground. And then that water back into the incoming flow stream for reuse. Yeah, it's certainly something that we have to deal with and manage. And we just don't want to, flush more than we have to, and certainly not any longer than we have to. So one of the last things is the dwell. So in this case, it's in seconds, and you can see he had it set to 5 seconds. The dwell time is really important because it's the time in between each tank flushing. And so say a tank flushes for 1:30. In this case, after that tank's done, there's only a 5-second delay until the next tank starts. And so the reason that this grower could do that is he actually had a VFD on the irrigation system. And so the pump speeds up and slows down automatically and actually at a pretty rapid pace. And so the pressure is always good in the system because the pump is moving and controlling the speed. If you're in a static pump situation and you don't have a lot of pressure on the bottom side, what you want to do is you want to set a longer dwell so that the system has time to recover and that PSI can recover on the bottom, so that when the next tank flushes, you have enough force to lift that media bed completely and thoroughly to make sure to maximize the value of that flush. And then also one thing that's super helpful and something that I always recommend to growers and certainly to all my distributors, consider putting a pressure sustaining valve downstream of these filters. You can wire it automatically into the backflush controller or just even use a preset regulator. And basically what that will force the system to do is that valve will constrict when the extra demand for that 200 gallons a minute comes to the filtration system. And it will restrict, just like that manual butterfly valve we talked about closing down earlier, this valve will automatically do it for you. And so it's an opportunity to get a more uniform and efficient backflush just by installing a simple valve. And then of course, final touches, it's always important, inspect all your connections on the filtration system, repair those leaks, pinholes, etc. Compare what you're seeing now to last season's notes on the flow rate at the flow meter. Look at the PSI on your gauges and record all that information for future reference. My easy plug for this is just let me come put some technology on it. Let me make you have a smart filtration system. It's a piece of infrastructure that's really easy for us to tap into and get a lot of data from, but also control. So we do pump control and automation. We have PSI and flow monitoring, water accounting, energy accounting. These are all the things that we can look at and provide for you and allow you to turn this unit, again, that's really valuable into something even more valuable with a lot of data and a lot of insights.
That's beautiful, Cory. I was just going to say, I wish there was a way I could watch all this happen without having to drive out and look at it every day.
Absolutely. And I have a grower in Kern County that looks at how often they're back flushing. And they're actually able to tell the incoming water quality that may be affecting other ranches that are pulling off the same canal system. And they can tell the water quality in the system because the upstream filtration units they can start seeing when they start increasing and flushing. And then they can figure out how much does each flush cost me, because they know the cost of an acre foot of water and they know how long they're flushing and they know the energy loss. And so again, these are insights that you can get even deeper into your farm operation. And again, it's very easy for us to put one of our JMogic units out there. And maybe it's just starting with flow monitoring today, but maybe it's automation tomorrow. So it's up to you on how you want to achieve that.
Cory, that sounds expensive, is it?
Expensive is relative. Value is the most important thing. And so when you look at what it takes in labor, what the cost of water is, what the cost of energy is, especially in California, I think when you look at all of these opportunities and what we can do, I don't think it's very expensive. And I think it brings a ton of value. And I think it's an opportunity, again, where you don't have to do automation today. We can set it up with our unit that can be built on for later use. So it's not, hey, buy this today, but it's no good tomorrow because you have to buy this next platform. It's buy this unit, and then how do we want to implement that unit for your operation? What makes sense for you?
Yeah.
So looking at our Spin Clean filter line is kind of our next piece. And a filter solutions here at Jane Irrigation. It's a reliable and cost-effective screen filter that utilizes the incoming water flow and pressure to remove debris from your irrigation system. It's really important to set these up correctly to get that extended performance life of the filter and the screen element, because the screens I know can be expensive, but there's a great value there. And common screen mesh sizes are 50, 100, 150, and 200. We have done custom mesh upon request. So please reach out if that's something you're interested in. Looking at the Spin Clean in and of itself, it's certainly a much smaller unit and compact, but nonetheless, it's as you can see on the takeaway on the left-hand side, one of the first things to do, and it may look challenging to take apart, but it's actually pretty simple. Most of what I'm going to describe to you can be done in about 15 minutes. So the first steps to remove the debris basin at the bottom of the filter, which is right here. And it's held together by a bail and handle, which is just a simple mechanism to turn, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. And so you just loosen that bail and handle, pull the debris basin off, inspect the inside bottom of the debris basin, because again, it's a debris basin. If there's debris in there, clean it out if it's present. If it's not, just set it to the side. And then what we're going to do is we're going to remove the filter elements. So that's going to be kind of this accordion of pieces here, which are going to be your inner and outer glands, your spin plate, your collars, and then the screen element itself. Again, that's all kind of goes together. There's really nothing crazy. It all just kind of snaps together. It's pretty straightforward. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pull those out so we can pressure wash that screen from the outside in to remove any existing debris. Looking at that, here's a picture of pressure washing it again from the outside in. Do not wash it from the inside out because you can push debris further into the screen elements and cause entrapment inside the mesh layers. Again, another simple test to make sure your screen's in good condition. Measure the length and measure the diameter, because if it's changed since it left the factory, that tells me that it's being exposed to severe pressures or water hammer, air gap, things like that. So just make sure that inspection goes good. Make sure you've cleaned it well. A lot of people say, oh, I cleaned it out. Well, they used a garden hose with 10 PSI and they expected that to clean it. No, you do need to pressure wash it and with a decent amount of force. And once you've done that, reinstall the filter elements and the debris basin, and you're good to go. Again, most of this is about a 15-minute process, maybe 20 minutes at most. Spin and clean filters need to be sized based on the flow rate of the irrigation system and the incoming flow. Filters that operate outside that specified range are likely to have performance issues or at least longevity issues before plugging. And so it's important to turn on that irrigation system and check the flow rate at the flow meter. Things change from season to season and actually throughout your season, depending on your pumping conditions. So if the flow rate at the flow meter is within the specifications of the filter, you can move on to checking the upstream and downstream PSI. If the flow is too high or too low, look at the technical brochure to check the number of plugs and size of spin plate that you might need. So here's a picture or a snapshot of the technical brochure itself. So in this case, I was just saying, let's take a 4-inch filter and let's say that our flow meter said it was 250 gallons a minute. Well, that puts us right in the middle of these numbers here. So what we would do is we would put one hole plugged on the spin plate. On the right-hand side here, you can see the spin plate and then a plug. They just glue into these. You can put up to 3 plugs in a spin plate, or it could be fully open. Again, just depending on the flow rate range that you're working in. This is really nice because at the beginning of the season, if you're 250, and by the end of the season, maybe it is dropped down to 180 or something like that because your well has changed or something along those lines, or pump efficiency, you can just put in another plug and this filter will keep operating. So looking at, again, 250 gallons a minute on a 4-inch filter, we would put one plug in that spin plate. That would put us in kind of this blue circle here. So we look at a 5-pound pressure differential between the incoming and the downstream side of the filter. And basically the velocity of that water and the spinning action with the curves in that spin plate are what scrub that screen and continue to push the debris down to the debris basin. If you have excessive debris loads, you can add an additional plug, which will increase that water velocity. It's also going to increase the pressure loss across your screen, but it kind of artificially moves you. If you remember all the fun economic classes back in the day of moving curves and things like that, it's kind of the same concept. It moves you out here, but still at the same flow rate, obviously, that you had, but you kind of get into this higher PSI range as far as use. And then thus you're gonna have better velocity and you're gonna remove more debris and stop it from sticking inside the screen, getting it down into the debris basin and then into the evacuation wastewater valve.
Cory, where do I get all this data? I mean, I don't have it with me today. Where can I find it?
Absolutely. Of course, always plug in the Jane website. There's a ton of resources on there from ag to landscape, technology, et cetera, which is maybe where you can find this video on a future date as well. But in the agriculture section of our website under technical brochures, if you scroll through, there's one for every product that we have, or at least product line. And under steel spin clean filters is where you can find this. If you have iOS or an iPhone, you can actually download the Jane Tech Library app. I have it on me all the time. It's super helpful because it opens it up in a PDF for you. You can actually save it to your phone. You can share it with others, something that's really easy to use and kind of a pocket guide, if you will. So the tech brochure is always a great place. If not, I have my phone number at the end. I'm sure you could give me a ring. So talking about getting that debris down to the debris basin, it's important to note, we even had to put a sticker on these so people understood the wastewater valve should be open during operation to continually evacuate all that debris. Because if it doesn't, it's just going to build up in the basin and migrate up towards the screen and then eventually just plug the screen in the filter. And then you're going to have to, again, disassemble and pressure wash. So if you just have that valve cracked open, I usually start with them halfway open. It's just a simple ball valve and kind of see how the system in the filter operates. If the filter runs continuously without additional pressure loss, which is a sign of plugging because it's building up in the screen element, then the wastewater valve can be closed slightly to reduce the amount of water that's coming out and leaving the filter. If you start seeing where the screen is catching more material and that PSI loss increases, that valve can be opened up a little bit more at that point. Again, maybe not fully open, but you can kind of find the sweet spot, if you will, to make sure that system will continually run. So that's kind of the simple basics of sand media and spin clean filtration set up for the season. Again, I put my email on here. I put my phone number on here. You can always find me on different social media channels, I think, as most people know. And if you're in the service area or even outside, feel free to give me a ring if you need any additional help.
Yeah, Cory, thank you. You said it was the simple basic, but you actually took us through some really more intermediate and advanced stuff. And I thought it was really great. I know everybody is a lot more prepared to deal with this season and their filters after your presentation than they were before. So thanks for doing a great job. Just want to also mention everybody, it's hard to believe that this is our 1-year anniversary of doing these lunch and learns. We've been at it for a year now. And boy, I have a lot of people to thank for that, right? Number one, I just want to thank all the tens of thousands of people who have attended our sessions in the past year. If they didn't have an interest in water use efficiency and water management, in getting better in using water, we wouldn't have these. So number one, thank you to all of you. Two, I want to say thank you to all the presenters. Cory, you've been on here several times. Thank you. And to all the other presenters who take their time, and it's usually after work time, to put these presentations together and lead us on this water use efficiency journey. I really appreciate that. I want to say thank you to Jane and Eric Olson, who's been a big supporter of education, education, education. We always hear it from Eric, and he's putting a lot of energy behind that and a lot of resources at Jane to do that. And we want to be sure to thank him as well. I want to mention Monica Valero. If you've noticed, she is live tweeting every session. So you can find all these tips out on Twitter as well. And she's done a great job with that. I want to thank the whole marketing team who works very hard to put these together and then and makes them live on in the virtual world and all the social media. I also want to thank in particular Alan Nazareth. He is our full stack developer at Jane. He does all the web pages. He does the invitations. He is the one who coordinates getting all of us here a couple times every week. It's a big job. He's done a great job with it, and I really appreciate that. And so another thing he brought to us this year, or at the end of this year, you see the QR code on Cory's slide right now. If you have a camera on your phone handy, hold it up to that QR code, and it will take you to our new web page for all our videos. And you will see they are categorized now. It should be easy to find anything you want to see. Those categories will change based on your interests. And now that we have, 100 or so videos, you're going to be able to find stuff easier as you want to get trained. So listen, we're on that page at janesusa.com/trainings. We're also on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio as well. So again, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody who's helped out over the past year. Really appreciate that too. Cory, have a great weekend.
Absolutely. You too. And thank you guys for the time.
Yeah, thank you.